Ethan had been counting the days for weeks, eagerly checking his calendar as the day of his homecoming approached. After months of traveling across the world, attending meetings, closing deals, and living in luxury, he felt a deep longing to see his parents again. The thought of surprising them 3 days earlier than planned filled him with excitement and a strange nervousness. It wasn't just the idea of returning home. It was the thought of stepping into the place where he had grown up, the place that shaped who he had become. As he boarded his private jet, Ethan leaned back in his leather seat, letting his mind wander through memories of his childhood. He remembered running barefoot across the green lawn, the smell of freshly baked bread in the kitchen, and the sound of his father's laughter echoing through the hall. These memories brought a smile to his face, but they also made him realize how much he had missed, how much he had been away, chasing success and wealth, while the people he loved were back home, living their daily lives without him. Ethan's thoughts shifted to the surprise he had planned. He imagined opening the front door and catching his parents completely off guard, their eyes widening in shock, followed by laughter, hugs, and maybe even tears. He could see it clearly in his mind, the warmth of their embrace, the joy lighting up their faces. It was a moment he had been dreaming about, and the fact that it was coming sooner than expected made his heart race with anticipation. Even during the long flight, Ethan's mind was alive with possibilities. He thought about the things he would say, the questions he would ask, and the stories he wanted to hear from his parents. He wondered if they had been worried about him while he was away, if they had been lonely, and if they had missed him as much as he had missed them. Each thought made him feel more connected to home, as if he could almost hear his mother calling him for dinner or see his father reading the newspaper in his favorite armchair. Despite his excitement, Ethan also felt a tiny flutter of anxiety. He had been away for so long that he worried things might have changed, that the house might not look the same, or that his parents' lives might have moved on without him. The thought made him tense for a moment, but he quickly shook it off, reminding himself that no matter what, he was coming home, and his homecoming, 3 days early, would be the perfect surprise to remind his parents of the bond they shared. As the plane touched down and Ethan prepared to leave the jet, he felt a mix of emotions: joy, anticipation, nervousness, and a touch of fear. He had grown into a confident, wealthy young man, yet stepping back into the world of his childhood brought back a vulnerability he hadn't felt in years. The airport was bustling with people, but none of them mattered. His focus was only on the familiar streets, the houses, and finally, the place that had always been his sanctuary. Driving through the city, Ethan noticed the little changes that had taken place during his absence. New shops, renovated buildings, and different cars parked along the streets. Yet, as he got closer to his neighborhood, a sense of comfort settled over him. He recognized the old trees lining the streets, the corner store where he had bought candies as a child, and the familiar sound of birds chirping. These small details made him feel like he was stepping back into a world that still belonged to him. By the time he approached his house, Ethan's heart was pounding with excitement. He slowed the car, taking in the familiar driveway, the garden his mother had planted, and the front door where he had always left his shoes after school. Everything looked the same, yet something felt different. There was a quietness, an unusual calm, that made him pause for a moment. He shook off the feeling, reminding himself that it was probably just his imagination, and with that thought, he got out of the car. Ready to make his entrance, ready to see the expressions on his parents' faces when they realized their son had returned earlier than expected. Every step toward the door felt like a drumbeat of anticipation. Ethan's mind was filled with the perfect scenario he had imagined countless times, but deep down, a tiny part of him wondered if reality would match the fantasy. Would his parents be as happy as he expected? Would everything feel the same as he remembered? With a deep breath, he placed his hand on the doorknob, ready to step inside, eager to see their faces, and to create a memory that would stay with him forever. Ethan stepped onto the familiar path leading to his house, the crunch of gravel under his shoes bringing back memories of childhood summers. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the garden his mother had planted years ago, a smell that had always made him feel safe, warm, and at home. He could see the house in the distance, its walls painted the same soft cream, the windows glinting in the afternoon sunlight. Yet, the quiet that greeted him made his heart skip a beat. Something felt off. The front door was closed, as it always had been, but there was no sign of movement inside. Normally, he would hear the muffled sound of his mother humming, or his father's deep laughter echoing through the halls. Today, the silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Ethan paused for a moment, wondering if he had arrived at the wrong time, if perhaps they were out for a walk, or maybe even asleep. The anticipation that had fueled him for the past hours now mixed with a strange unease. He reached the door and knocked softly, expecting the familiar sound of footsteps rushing to greet him, but there was only silence. His hand lingered on the doorknob, hesitating. He called out, "Mom? Dad?" His voice echoing faintly, unnaturally loud in the quiet street. Still, no reply came, just the soft rustle of leaves in the garden and the distant hum of a car passing by. Ethan's pulse quickened, a knot forming in his stomach. This was not the joyful reunion he had imagined on the flight. Something was waiting for him behind that door, and he couldn't yet see it. Taking a deep breath, Ethan pushed the door open, expecting a warm greeting, a hug, maybe even his mother's laughter. But the moment he stepped inside, a chill ran down his spine. The living room, which had always been filled with light and warmth, seemed dim and heavy. The curtains were drawn slightly, letting in only a thin strip of sunlight that illuminated the dust floating in the air. Everything looked familiar, yet everything felt strange. He saw his parents sitting together on the sofa, their bodies stiff, their faces drawn, eyes darting nervously toward him as if they had been caught in a secret. Ethan froze for a moment, unsure of what to say. The confident, wealthy young man who had just arrived from his travels felt small, almost powerless. In the face of this tension, he had expected smiles and laughter, not whispered conversations and uneasy glances. The room seemed to hold a secret, and it was staring him directly in the face. Ethan's mother looked up first, her eyes widening slightly, but instead of the joy he had imagined, there was a flicker of something else, fear, maybe worry, a hesitation he had never seen before. His father followed, rising slowly, his usual calm and strong demeanor replaced by a stiff, almost defensive posture. Ethan's chest tightened, confusion and concern mixing in a swirl of emotions. The home he had cherished in his memories was no longer the sanctuary he had imagined. It was a place of questions he wasn't yet ready to answer. He took a cautious step forward, his voice steady but soft. "I came early. I wanted to surprise you." His parents exchanged a brief glance, a silent conversation that Ethan couldn't understand, and for a moment, the air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break the tension. But instead of relief or happiness, there was a pause, a hesitation, as if the house itself was holding its secrets. Ethan's eyes wandered around the room, noticing small signs that something had changed. The table was cluttered with unopened letters, the once neat bookshelves were slightly disorganized, and the air carried a faint scent of something unfamiliar. He felt a pang in his chest, realizing that the life his parents had been living in his absence was not as perfect as he had imagined. The home was the same, but the people in it were carrying burdens he hadn't known about, burdens that had grown while he was away. Steeling himself, Ethan moved closer, determined to understand. He needed to know what had happened in the days he had missed. The anticipation and excitement he had felt on the plane were replaced by a new kind of tension, a feeling that he had stumbled into something larger than he had expected. And as he looked at his parents' faces, a part of him knew that the surprise he had planned was no longer the most important thing. Something deeper, more serious, awaited him in the walls of this house. Ethan took another step, ready to confront the unknown, ready to face whatever had changed while he was away, and in that moment, he realized that this homecoming would not just be about hugs, laughter, and joyful tears. It would be about discovering the truths that had remained hidden, truths that would challenge him, reshape his understanding of his family, and ultimately, test his own strength and love. As Ethan stepped further into the house, his heart pounded with excitement, but the strange atmosphere he had sensed at the door now deepened. The living room, which had once been alive with laughter and warmth, seemed almost foreign. The furniture was in place, but there was a heaviness in the air, a silence that felt unnatural. His eyes scanned the room, searching for signs of normalcy, but instead, he noticed little things that unsettled him. An untouched cup of tea on the table, the faint smell of something burnt in the kitchen, and the soft hum of the television left on but unattended. His parents sat side by side on the sofa, yet their distance felt greater than any physical space. His mother fidgeted with her hands, twisting a ring on her finger nervously, while his father avoided eye contact, staring blankly at a point on the floor. Their usual warmth, the spark of familiarity that had always greeted him at home, was missing. Replacing it was an awkward tension that made Ethan's chest tighten. "Mom. Dad?" he called again, his voice breaking slightly, not with fear, but with confusion. The anticipation he had felt just moments ago was now tangled with a creeping anxiety. Something was wrong, and he could sense it before any words were even spoken. His parents exchanged a quick glance, and in that glance, Ethan saw a mix of fear and sorrow, a silent warning that what awaited him was far from what he had imagined. He took a cautious step closer, and the air seemed to shift. The faint creak of the wooden floor under his shoes sounded louder than usual, and his own heartbeat echoed in his ears. His father finally looked up, but the eyes Ethan saw were not the same eyes that had watched him grow up. They were tired, burdened, and weary, as if they had been carrying a weight in silence for far too long. Ethan's mother spoke first, her voice soft but strained. "Ethan, you shouldn't have come early." Her words struck him like a sudden gust of wind, not harsh, but full of unspoken meaning. He frowned, stepping closer. "Why?" "I wanted to surprise you." "I thought," his voice faltered, because what he saw around him didn't match the image of happiness he had imagined. There was a tension in every corner, in every look, a story that had unfolded while he was away, and he had no idea what it was. He noticed the small details that had escaped him at first glance: papers scattered on the dining table, a calendar marked with red ink, bills stacked in a corner, and an old photo frame turned slightly away from view. It wasn't just untidiness, it was a sign, subtle but unmistakable, that something in his parents' lives had shifted dramatically. Something had broken the rhythm of their days, the harmony that Ethan had taken for granted. His father finally spoke, voice low and measured. "Ethan, there are things you don't know yet, things that happened while you were away." The words landed heavily, each one deliberate, each one opening a door to an unknown reality. Ethan's mind raced, trying to imagine what could be so serious that it had changed the atmosphere of his home. His mother's anxious glances, his father's guarded tone, the unusual silence, all pointed to something significant, something that had shaken their world. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Then tell me," he said, his voice firm despite the lump in his throat. "I need to know. I'm home now, and I want to help." His parents looked at him, hesitation in their eyes, as if revealing the truth might bring it crashing down around them, but they knew he had returned, and there was no turning back, no more pretending, no more keeping secrets, not with Ethan standing in the doorway, the same son who had grown up in this very house, yet now a man ready to face whatever awaited. As he waited for the explanation, Ethan felt a strange mixture of fear, determination, and curiosity. The home he had loved so dearly had changed, and in that change lay a mystery that demanded to be uncovered. Each detail, each look, each silent gesture seemed to whisper a story he was only beginning to understand. He realized that this homecoming was not about the hugs, the laughter, or the joy he had imagined. This was a moment of revelation, a turning point where he would see the life his parents had been living without him, and it would change everything. And in that quiet, tense room, Ethan felt the weight of the unknown settle around him, heavier than any suitcase he had carried across the globe. Yet within that weight, there was also resolve, a deep and unshakable determination to uncover the truth, understand his family, and face whatever challenges awaited. For Ethan, this was only the beginning of a journey far more complicated, far more emotional, and far more real than he had ever imagined. Ethan stood in the living room, his eyes moving carefully over every detail, hoping that something, anything, would explain the uneasy silence. But the more he looked, the more questions appeared. There were clues, subtle yet undeniable, that something had changed in his parents' lives while he had been away, clues that were small on their own but together painted a picture he wasn't ready to see. On the coffee table lay a stack of unopened letters, their envelopes slightly crumpled as if they had been ignored for days. Some had official stamps, others looked like notices, and a sinking feeling grew in Ethan's chest. He picked one up cautiously, turning it over in his hands, his mind racing through possibilities. Bills, he thought, notices, problems. He could feel a bead of sweat forming on his forehead, the anticipation turning into worry. His gaze moved to the dining table, cluttered with receipts, a half-written check, and a calendar marked with red circles. Normally, this would have been a mundane scene, but today, it screamed of hidden stress and unspoken troubles. Ethan noticed his father's wallet left open, a few papers sticking out that looked like overdue statements. His mother's purse was on the couch, unzipped, with a credit card bill peeking from the top, and the edges of the pages were slightly worn, as if she had been going through them repeatedly. Ethan's heart began to pound faster, and he felt a lump in his throat. This was the first time he realized that his parents might have been struggling in ways he hadn't imagined. The idea of them having to manage alone while he was away, thinking everything was fine, filled him with guilt. He had left to pursue success, to build a life of wealth and comfort, and yet here was evidence that they might have been carrying a burden he hadn't even suspected. He stepped into the kitchen, where the scent of burnt toast lingered faintly in the air, a smell that was unusual for his mother, who prided herself on perfect breakfasts. The sink held unwashed dishes, the counter had stains and crumbs, and a small stack of unopened grocery receipts caught his eye. Ethan ran his fingers over them, noticing unusual purchases, expensive but necessary, as if his parents were trying to stretch their money to cover something urgent. In the hallway, he noticed the photographs on the wall, slightly tilted, one frame even missing entirely. He remembered that frame. It had held a picture of him and his parents at the beach, smiling under the sun. It had been perfectly straight the last time he had left, and now its absence felt like a symbol, a quiet signal that something in their family life had shifted, perhaps arguments, perhaps worries, perhaps moments of disappointment he hadn't been there to witness. Ethan moved closer to the sofa, where his parents remained, their eyes avoiding his. Their silence weighed on him more than any words could have. He tried again to speak lightly. "Mom. Dad, is everything okay? Did something happen while I was gone?" His father's jaw tightened, his mother's hands trembled slightly as she clutched a tissue, and Ethan realized that the clues he had noticed were just the surface of a much deeper story. He saw the subtle tension in his parents' faces, the way they shifted uncomfortably when he looked at them, the way they seemed to avoid any direct conversation. All these small details, the unopened letters, the scattered bills, the disorganized home, were like pieces of a puzzle, hinting at something serious, something that had shaken their family while he was away. Each clue made Ethan more determined to uncover the truth, to understand what had really happened. A sense of urgency grew inside him, mixed with fear and love. He had come home to surprise them, to see joy and laughter, but the first clues he had found told him this would not be simple. This was no longer a homecoming of celebration, it was a homecoming of discovery, of confronting reality. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together what these signs could mean, and he realized that he had to prepare himself for the next revelation, whatever it might be. And as he looked around the room once more, taking in every detail, Ethan understood something he hadn't before. Wealth, travel, and success could never shield him from the challenges and struggles that his parents had endured. The first clues were just the beginning, a warning that the story behind their lives was more complex, more emotional, and more heart-wrenching than he had ever imagined. And with that thought, he steeled himself, ready to face whatever truths were about to come, knowing that his family's world, and his own understanding of it, would never be the same again. Ethan felt the weight of the clues pressing down on him, each one pulling him closer to the truth he had been dreading. His hands trembled slightly as he stood in the middle of the living room, unsure whether to speak first or wait for his parents to explain. But the silence between them was unbearable, heavy and suffocating. He knew he couldn't let it continue any longer. He had to confront them, to face whatever had been hidden behind the closed doors while he was away. "Mom. Dad. I need to know," Ethan said finally, his voice steady but firm. "I can feel that something's wrong. Please, tell me what's going on." His father shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, running a hand through his hair, while his mother clutched a small handkerchief, wringing it nervously in her hands. Ethan noticed the way her eyes darted to the floor, avoiding his gaze, and he felt a pang in his chest. The mother who had always been warm and strong now seemed fragile, almost like a stranger. His father let out a long sigh, as if he had been holding back for weeks, months even, and now the dam of secrecy was about to break. "Ethan, we didn't want you to worry," his father said quietly, voice strained, "but things haven't been easy while you've been away." Ethan's stomach tightened, fear mingling with anger and confusion. "Not easy? What do you mean? Tell me," he demanded, stepping closer, feeling the urgency to understand, to know the truth. His mother finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "It's the bills, the house, some investments. Things got out of hand while you were traveling." Her words tumbled out in a rush, barely forming complete sentences, as if saying them aloud made them more real. Ethan blinked, trying to process. His mind raced through every scenario: financial trouble, family conflict. How had this happened without him knowing? He could see the guilt etched into his parents' faces, the way they avoided meeting his eyes, the hesitation in their voices, and it made his chest tighten even more. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I could have helped," he said, his tone rising slightly, though he tried to keep it calm. "I've been away, yes, but I'm still your son, and I want to help." "Why did you carry this alone?" His father's shoulders sagged, and he looked down at his hands, wringing them nervously. "We didn't want to burden you. We thought you had enough to handle with your life, your work, your success." Ethan felt a mix of frustration, sadness, and compassion swell inside him. He had imagined this reunion filled with joy, but instead, he was faced with a family carrying hidden struggles that had grown heavier while he was away. His mother reached out, placing a trembling hand on his arm. "Ethan, it's not just about money," she said softly. "There have been other things, tensions in the family, arguments, decisions that went wrong. We didn't know how to fix it on our own." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, to make sense of it all. He had always believed that wealth and success could protect him and his loved ones from problems, but now he realized that no amount of money could shield a family from fear, mistakes, and heartbreak. "Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you let me come home sooner?" he asked quietly, the anger in his voice now tempered by concern. His father finally looked up, eyes glistening with emotion. "We were ashamed, and scared. We didn't want you to see us struggling, Ethan. We didn't want you to think less of us." The honesty in his father's words struck him, cutting through his anger and replacing it with understanding. He realized that the secret keeping wasn't about hiding from him, it was about pride, fear, and love. Ethan stepped closer, placing a hand over his father's, feeling the warmth and vulnerability beneath. "You don't have to hide anything from me," he said softly. "I'm your son. Whatever it is, we face it together. We'll fix it together." His mother's hand found his, and a small, relieved smile crossed her face, a smile that told him that while the struggle was real, the bond they shared was stronger, unbroken, and unshakable. In that tense, emotional moment, the confrontation had shifted from fear and confusion to connection and determination. Ethan understood that the truth, however painful, was the first step toward healing, toward rebuilding what had been shaken. He had come home expecting to surprise his parents, but instead, he had been surprised by reality, confronted with the fragility and resilience of family life. And he knew that from this confrontation, a new chapter was about to begin, one where honesty, understanding, and love would guide them forward. After the confrontation, Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because finally, the truth was being spoken, and dread because he had a growing sense that what awaited him next would be far worse than he had imagined. His parents had admitted there were struggles, tensions, mistakes, but the details remained incomplete, shadows of a deeper reality he hadn't yet faced. Ethan's father motioned for him to sit at the dining table, the one that had once been the center of laughter, homework, and family meals. Now, it was covered with papers, statements, and documents that looked ominously official. Ethan's stomach sank as he realized that this was the evidence of what they had been hiding. The room that had always felt safe was now the stage for truths that could shake everything he thought he knew about his family. He picked up the first document, a bank statement with numbers that made his eyes widen. A series of unexpected withdrawals, failed transactions, and overdraft notices painted a story of financial trouble far more serious than he had anticipated. His parents' worried expressions suddenly made sense, but the reality hit him like a punch to the chest. This wasn't just a temporary problem, this was a crisis, one that had grown silently while he had been away chasing his own life. Next, he noticed letters from creditors and legal notices, unopened, stacked neatly in order. Each one seemed to scream at him, a silent accusation of neglect and misfortune. He realized that his parents had been struggling to keep their home, their lives, and their dignity intact. While he had been flying across continents, making deals worth millions, they had been quietly battling a reality he had never imagined, and it devastated him. Ethan's mother reached over and gently took his hand, her fingers trembling. "Ethan, we didn't want you to know like this," she whispered, voice breaking. "We tried, we really tried, but we didn't want to burden you." Ethan swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it hard to speak. "I should have been here," he said softly, guilt washing over him. "I should have seen this coming. I should have been able to help before it got this bad." He continued to sift through the documents, each one revealing a new piece of the puzzle: missed mortgage payments, cancelled utilities, a car loan default, and even notices about late school fees from his childhood tutor. It was clear that his parents had been silently sacrificing to keep the family afloat, hiding the full truth to protect him from worry, yet in doing so, they had carried a burden alone, one that Ethan now felt he should have shared. His father finally spoke, voice heavy with emotion. "We thought we could manage. We thought we could handle it without involving you. We didn't want you to worry or feel guilty for the choices you've made in your own life." Ethan's eyes filled with tears, the realization crashing over him. Success, wealth, and distance had made him blind to the reality his parents faced. He had believed that he had been building a life that would protect them, but in truth, they had been silently struggling. Every day he was away. Then came the final blow, a notice from the bank indicating that their home was at risk of foreclosure. The very house he had grown up in, the walls that held all his childhood memories, was under threat. His parents' faces were pale, their usual calm replaced with fear and exhaustion, and Ethan felt a powerful surge of determination, anger, and love all at once. How had they managed to stay strong in front of him while hiding this? How could he have been so unaware? Ethan sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His mind raced through possibilities, solutions, and ways to help. He realized that no amount of wealth, no number of deals, could ever replace the need for presence, awareness, and connection in a family. The devastating discovery had shattered the illusion of control he thought he had. But it also ignited a fire inside him, a need to act, to protect, to repair what had been damaged. Looking at his parents, Ethan felt both sorrow and resolve. The burden they had carried alone was now shared, and he knew that he would not allow them to face it any longer. The devastating discovery had been a cruel awakening, but it was also a turning point, a moment that demanded courage, action, and the unshakable bond of family. Ethan vowed silently that he would do everything in his power to fix what had been broken, and to restore not only their home but their trust, hope, and happiness. Ethan sat in the living room, staring at the papers scattered across the table, each one a silent reminder of the challenges his parents had endured in his absence. He felt a storm of emotions swirling inside him, guilt, anger, sorrow, and a strange helplessness he had never experienced before. The reality of what they had been going through hit him harder than any financial report ever could, and for the first time, he truly saw the weight of their lives without him. He remembered all the trips he had taken, the deals he had closed, the luxurious parties and meetings he had attended, and the shame of realization crept over him. In chasing his own dreams, he had unknowingly drifted away from the very people he loved most, leaving them to carry burdens alone. Burdens he now understood were far heavier than he had imagined. He felt anger, not at his parents, but at himself, for being so blind, for believing that wealth alone could protect them from life's struggles. His mother sat beside him, her hands resting in her lap, trembling slightly. She looked at him with a mixture of relief and fear, as if hoping he could somehow erase the pain of the past months. Ethan reached out and held her hands gently, feeling the fragility beneath the surface. "I should have been here," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I should have known. I should have helped." His mother shook her head softly, tears welling in her eyes. "You were building your life, Ethan. We didn't want to burden you, but we always hoped you'd come back when you could." His father remained silent, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on a point beyond the table, but Ethan could see the unspoken words in his expression, the exhaustion, the worry, and the quiet pride that despite everything, they had survived without him, yet their strength had come at the cost of isolation and hidden fear, and Ethan's heart ached with both sorrow and admiration. Ethan leaned back, letting the silence wash over him, but it was not a comforting silence. It was heavy, filled with the echoes of what had been endured, the quiet struggles that had gone unnoticed. He felt the raw impact of absence, the reality that love alone could not prevent hardships, and that presence, attention, and care were just as important as any financial provision. He realized that success, no matter how grand, could never replace human connection. As he reflected, guilt shifted to determination. He could no longer linger in despair. He had seen the reality of their struggles, and now he had to act, not just to fix the financial issues but to mend the emotional gaps that had grown while he was away. The emotional fallout was not just about numbers or debts, it was about trust, about showing that he truly cared, about rebuilding bonds that had been stretched thin by distance and silence. He looked at his parents again, taking in the lines on their faces, the tiredness in their eyes, and the small gestures of hope that remained despite everything. He realized that his presence now was more important than anything else, that the moments he would spend with them, listening, supporting, and simply being there, would carry more meaning than any sum of money. He took a deep breath, feeling both the weight of responsibility and a renewed sense of purpose. "I can help," Ethan said finally, voice steady. "We will fix this together. Everything, every problem, we will face it together." His parents looked at him, a mix of surprise, relief, and quiet joy in their eyes. It was the first time in months that the tension seemed to lift, just a little, replaced by the warmth of connection. The emotional fallout, while painful, had also opened a door, a chance for healing, for understanding, and for rebuilding what had been broken. Ethan realized that emotions were not just reactions, they were a roadmap, showing where attention, care, and love were most needed. He felt the full gravity of what had happened while he was away, but he also felt the strength to act, to be present, to support, and to repair. The emotional fallout had stripped away illusions and pride, leaving only truth, vulnerability, and a deep, unshakable love. A love that now demanded action, honesty, and unwavering presence. In that living room, amidst papers, worries, and tears, Ethan understood the real meaning of family, of responsibility, and of connection. The emotional fallout was not the end, it was the beginning of a journey toward healing, trust, and unity, one that would require patience, courage, and the willingness to confront every fear, mistake, and hidden struggle together. And for the first time in months, Ethan felt ready to take that journey. Ethan woke up the next morning with a clear sense of purpose, the weight of the previous days still lingering but now transformed into determination. The confrontation, the discoveries, and the emotional fallout had shaken him to his core, but they had also given him clarity. He knew what he needed to do, not just to fix the financial troubles, but to rebuild the trust, love, and connection that had been strained over months of absence. He began by sitting down with his parents over breakfast, a quiet meal that was far from perfect but filled with meaning. No rushed apologies, no awkward silences, just presence, conversation, and attention. Ethan listened as his parents shared more details about the struggles they had faced, the difficult choices, the sleepless nights, and the quiet sacrifices. Each word added depth to his understanding, and he felt both sorrow for their pain and admiration for their resilience. Ethan realized that immediate action was necessary, and he carefully went through the bills, statements, and legal notices, creating a plan to stabilize their finances. He reassured his parents that while the situation was serious, it was not hopeless. Together, they prioritized the most urgent matters, the house, utilities, and essential living expenses. Then they worked on a longer-term strategy to recover and secure their financial stability. Ethan's presence, guidance, and resources brought a sense of relief and hope that his parents hadn't felt in months. But the resolution was not just about money. Ethan knew that the emotional scars needed healing as well. He spent the next days talking, laughing, and reminiscing with his parents, sharing meals, playing games they had once enjoyed, and simply being there, present in their lives, listening to their fears and worries, and allowing them to rely on him again. These moments of connection, however small, began to rebuild the trust and bond that distance and secrets had weakened. Ethan also encouraged his parents to speak openly, without fear of judgment, and for the first time, the family confronted the tension that had quietly grown in the months he had been away. They discussed mistakes, miscommunications, and unspoken worries, and while the conversations were sometimes uncomfortable, they were necessary. Each discussion peeled back layers of guilt, shame, and fear, replacing them with understanding, empathy, and renewed closeness. Over the following weeks, Ethan took concrete steps to support his parents, using his resources wisely while also teaching them strategies to manage and protect their finances in the future. They worked together, side by side, not just as parents and child, but as a team, strengthening their relationship and building resilience against future challenges. The young billionaire had returned to astonish them, but instead, he had become a pillar of support, a guide, and a source of hope. Beyond the practical solutions, Ethan made a promise to never allow distance, work, or ambition to replace presence, to be there for his parents emotionally, and to ensure that no secret struggles would ever go unnoticed again. He realized that wealth was meaningless without love, connection, and care, and that the greatest success was the ability to protect and nurture the family that had always been his foundation. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the sun casting golden light across the familiar walls, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. The home, once shadowed by fear and tension, now felt alive again, filled with laughter, warmth, and hope. The crisis had tested them, shaken them, and forced them to confront uncomfortable truths, but it had also strengthened them, reaffirming the bonds that truly mattered. Ethan looked at his parents and saw relief, gratitude, and love reflected in their eyes, and he realized that this homecoming, though far from the joyful surprise he had imagined, had become something far more meaningful. It had been a journey of discovery, confrontation, and emotional growth, culminating in a resolution that was not just about fixing problems, but about rebuilding hearts, trust, and family. As the evening settled, Ethan knew that challenges might come again, but he also knew that together, they could face anything. The young billionaire who had returned early to astonish his parents had instead witnessed the fragility and strength of family life, and he had learned that true wealth was measured not by money or success, but by love, presence, and the courage to face life's storms together. And in that understanding, he found a satisfaction and purpose far greater than any achievement he had ever known.